Thank you. Uh, the next session we have speakers, Mr. Nikhil Donde, Managing Director, IT Consulting, Protiviti, India. He will speak on emerging trends of security threat. Mr. C.N. Raghupati, Vice President, Head, India Business Unit, Infosys. He will speak on analytics, social media, Internet of Things, cybersecurity, how they intersect. Mr. Sudipto Jaina, Associate Director, TCG Digital, who will speak on capacity building of cybersecurity. The session will be moderated by Mr. R.N. Lahiri, the Chairperson Emeritus of Emerging Technologies Committee, the Bengal Chamber. Mr. Lahiri had 35 years of professional and industrial experience in information technology, power and manufacturing, education also. He had worked in TCS for 24 years and retired from TCS as Principal Consultant in February 2013. Now he is the Director and Vice Chairman of Techno India, Batanagar. We'll request you to take your seats so that we can start the next session. I'll request the speakers of the next session to please take their seats on the dais. Mr. R.N. Lahiri, Mr. Nikhil Donde, Mr. C.N. Raghupati, and Mr. Sudipto Jaina. May we request the speakers to take their seats on the dais, and may we request the audience to please take your seats so that we can start the session. Thank you.
Hello. Yeah, I'll just please. Please. Come. No problem. Can we start now? Mr. Donde. This panel discussion is going to happen almost next 40-45 minutes. So there are 3 panelists. Now I'll be the moderator. So mostly I'll just say the first one would be Mr. Nikhil Donde, who has come all the way from Maharashtra, from Mumbai. He's the Managing Director and IT Consulting, Protiviti, India. So he will be talking in the emerging trends of security threat.
Okay.
Next, Mr. Raghu Kavle. He has come all the way from Bangalore. He is the Senior Vice President and India Business Head of Infosys. He will be covering mostly the analytics, social media, Internet of Things, cyber security, how they intersect. And third person is Mr. Sudipto Jaina, the Associate Director of TCG Digital, Capacity Planning of Cyber Security. We will be discussing these 3 areas one after another, but I would like to say that The thumb rule is 10 minutes for each for the presentation, and then we will have the interaction with the and some questions from the floor. Okay? So I would request first Mr. Donde, if you just give your areas to be covered. Okay?
Thank you, Mr. Larry. And thank you everybody over here for attending this. After the opening session, which was fairly in-depth, very comprehensive, and the kind of points which were raised by Dr. Rai, and Atul said that it was a uphill task for him to say something after that, which is of any significance. But I would say it's the easiest thing to do. That if somebody like Dr. Rai has taken a session in the beginning, for the work for us is very easy, because we just have to pick a few leaves from that book and just reiterate it for the audience. In a way, that's what is going to happen, because most of the points which we were planning to discuss in this session, in some form or other, have been covered by Dr. Roy any which ways. What I'm going to cover today specifically is, in next 10 to 15 minutes, is basically cover only 2 points of agenda, which is I'm going to talk about the emerging threat landscape and the need to collaborate between the various agencies. Some of this already got covered, but we will have a quick overview around this. I will not spend time on the definitions and stuff, but what I'm trying to say over here is that the cyber risk as a definition is becoming far more generic in nature. Anything that is touching technology, whether it is IT or IoT or any other thing which is industrial control systems and stuff, risks that is presented through these systems is identified as a cyber risk. So we did, in the opening session itself, mention all these incidents. There's a Ukrainian power plant outage and the projector outage. The SWIFT hack for the banks which got impacted from the Bangladesh bank incident which happened over there. The Sony hack as well got discussed. So these things are pretty common nowadays. Headlines scream at us, newer and newer threats which emerge. It doesn't shock us anymore, or maybe it shocks us more than what we thought. We have seen the last of it, and some new headline comes up very next day. What's important is that it is not sparing any industry. If you see, there was a research recently done by Verizon, and it's taken various industry sectors and seen the kind of threats which are impacted. What is more important to see is that if you see the other graph on the right side, this basically shows over the period how the threats have emerged, the breaches that have happened. So earlier, errors, misuse, physical threats, environmental threats were the ones we were usually planning for and ones we were more prevalent, are basically, it's a stagnated graph. Whereas hacking, malware, social engineering, social media related threats are the ones which are proliferating over the years. And that is the scary part, because the more exposure we have towards this, the kind of breaches that are going to happen are going to be exponentially increasing. But to understand that, it's important to see what really is the landscape from a threat perspective, because it is very easy to say and get paranoid about how your data is going to be secured in your bank or in any other, or your telecom operator, or say your organization's data, or whether it's personal organization's data. So it's important to see the landscape per se. So there are various threat agents. You have the criminals, you have the competitors, you have disgruntled employees, which are your insiders, activists, state agents that we discussed earlier as well, and terrorists. This is not a comprehensive list, but it's an indicative list of the threat agents that are acting in the overall landscape. There are various motivations that people have. Now, these are not mapped one-to-one with these threat agents. The threat agent may have a different motivation as well. But typically a disgruntled employee may want to have some kind of a revenge on the organization. A state agent would want political gain out of that situation. And the competitors would want to look at the corporate espionage. Now there are various techniques. The next dimension that is applied on that is the technique through which a hacker, the hacker utilizes basically. So it could be hacking, it could be malware, distributed denial of service, advanced persistent threats, botnets, spywares, viruses. This is again not an exhaustive list. This is just an indicative list of various techniques that a hacker can apply. Then more importantly, what are the targets? What is it that the hacker is trying to break into or destroy or siphon off? These are applications, critical systems, network infrastructure, intellectual property, strategic information, personal identifiable information. Now this correlation between the threat agent's motivation, techniques and targets can go any which way. So you can see the kind of permutation combinations that it will create for any enterprise or any organization that wants to protect its data. The impacts are very clear to everyone. There is a loss of revenue, loss of reputation, loss of data, legal implications, systems unavailability.
From just a software sitting in a server, the edge of the software has actually expanded. It is no longer a PC. It can be, as in healthcare, it can be a device. I don't know how many of you have Fitbits. Or it can be a mobile phone on which you do your banking. Or it could be the Internet of Things represented by an RFID tag. Or it could be a sensor. Okay. So what does this mean for us from a cyber security perspective? It essentially means that life is no longer simple given the von Neumann equation, which was the original computer architecture, where you had a CPU, you had the compute, etc. The entire architecture of IT has changed, and you need to look at IoT, you need to look at devices, and you need to look at software. Now let's come to social media. Today everybody communicates via Twitter or via Facebook. If I want to see whether anybody is commenting on any of my projects, morning I get up and look to Twitter. We have a generation which can only communicate in 140 words, right? So most banks or most consumer companies today want to say, okay, I want to integrate my CRM systems, etc., with social media. I want to look at what Twitter does. I want to give customers an opportunity to interact with me via Twitter, which is a very good idea from a marketing perspective. But not so good idea from a security perspective. Why? Because social media is a place where malware, viruses, etc., can be easily injected into your system. Now, so what we are talking about is a huge system where your attackers can come from anywhere. Now, obviously, we talked a lot about devices and so on. But one quick thought is, does the basic architecture of your system change? How do you have to look at your basic system architecture itself? In fact, one of the things that we are doing in the software engineering world, and I'm happy to discuss this further or have discussions, is today what we do is we have APIs which only expose certain amount of data. For example, the entire GSTN system, which is being built on open source, is we are only exposing APIs to the general service providers, and we have a system of record which is insulated. So what do we do when we have IoT, social media, etc. coming together? We need to look at the architecture. Am I saying the API architecture is the best architecture? Maybe, maybe not. But that's what we are doing, and that's what seems to be fairly successful. Of course, the hackers are always one step ahead of people like me who design systems. But more importantly, do we have standards for devices? I have a close family of mine who works for Li Eco, the Chinese giant, but I guess it's same with every mobile handset manufacturer. And every few weeks, the lady she's in charge of marketing was launching a campaign. So I asked her one day when I called her, I said, you just did a campaign a month back, so what are you doing again? She says, you don't know, Raghu, you know, we have every month, every 2 months, our handset design changes because the youngsters want it that way. But then have you tested the device? Have you tested it for security purposes? What are the standards, Indian standards to which those devices are manufactured? Now that's a question I think we are discussing, you know, as industry bodies, IEEE, CII, etc. We are discussing, and of course happy to include anybody in that. In the power systems group, we have for power systems, we are taking it up very strongly in the smart grid space, but it should be there in almost all spaces where devices, IoT, etc. have some certain set of standards so that at least some common security elements are inbuilt into it. Of course, if somebody becomes mischievous, they can always override that. Secondly, how do you firewall your system of record? I already talked about APIs. But APIs are okay for new systems. What do you do for an old banking system which wants to go new? You want to compete with the new private banks. What do you do there? That's a second question which deserves answers. The third, somebody talked about darknet. I think there was a question on darknet and he referred to the Tor browser. I teach in a couple of universities, and let me tell you, I know very famous universities in the world where the students know how to access the darknet without going through any particular browser. So I think the question is, security is extremely important, but apart from software, the IoT, social media, the new emerging technologies add a great degree of complexity. The degree of complexity is also added by machine learning. Like I told you, we are signed up with this trucking company. So they aggregate all the data and they sort of put it through machine learning routines. There are about 7 or 8 mathematical methods by which one does machine learning, Bayesian logic being one among them. But then when you aggregate the data, how do you know which data is going to corrupt what? So therein lies a problem when you do data aggregation. So do you want to spend on encryption and de-encryption when it goes into the database? That's a question which we have to ask ourselves as a nation, because maybe that's the only answer. But then in that case, we'll have to see how do you encrypt it. Do systems become slower because of encryption at the database level, or do you only encrypt it at the application level? Now, it's like the famous Dickens novel, it's the best of time, it's the worst of time. For somebody like me in technology, who's more into the machine learning, artificial intelligence and big system space, it's very exciting times. If you look at hardware, what is happening is that there is a new thing called hyperconvergence. You no longer have memory, compute, routers, all differently. They all fuse together to be driven again by software. But that again gives rise to another security paradigm, that can somebody start meddling with the way your hardware is designed for. These are all very interesting questions. Do I have answers? I have some hypotheses. I wouldn't call them answers. Okay. And I don't know how many of you are fans of TV crime shows. I am. And for those of you who are interested and are technically minded, there's a very famous show that comes on called Person of Interest. I don't know how many of you have seen the Person of Interest. It's a war between two artificial intelligence systems and one group, the good group. What they do is they go and hard code into the opposing system in such a way that the three protagonists even if their picture is taken by the video camera, even if their fingerprints are say taken, it does not treat them as a threat. Which only shows, from my mind, what is the risk in even an artificial intelligence system. If you can go into the server and hard code it so that the server does not recognize Raghu as a threat coming in, then that's finished. So I think we are entering very interesting times. I think my next speaker is going to talk about the academics and the other portion of it. I just wanted to leave you with a thought, 2-3 thoughts when I conclude. The first is, technology has changed so rapidly that if I sit down to do my reading all over again, it's something new. Every year when I teach, I have to rewrite my course. Secondly, IoT, social media, mobility are not something separate. You will have to consider them as a part of your system, whether you're in banking or whether you're in logistics or whatever it is. So they are realities. And lastly, we should get some standards into all this, so that when they start interacting with your software, we definitely know at least somebody has checked out the cell phone which you bought at the latest flash sale, so that it doesn't have a malware sitting in it. With that, I look forward to the question and answer session after this. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Thank you, Mr. Kable. Now I would request the next speaker, Mr. Sudipto Jaina from the TCG Digital.
And I basically have a technical background, and like some of the community back there posed certain questions. I too face a lot of challenges, especially in this particular arena. And it's a very complex, it's a very, very complex environment. It's something which is not simple to answer to. It is not very easy to tackle. But collectively, I think each one of us can really make a difference here. But having said that, we are all talking in terms of information space. We are talking in terms of the digital movement, the Internet of Things, as Raghu has been pointing out. Dr. Gulshan Rai has mentioned a lot of things which I think he stole from my slide, but then that's okay. And you have Talim Kumar, sir, who has gone ahead and said a few things which I thought I'd already built in here. But he's gone ahead and said, I'm just going to reiterate on those points. But the fundamental nature being, look at the information technology. The infographic here, if you look at it, is overwhelming. This is an internet minute in our lives. And if you look at it, there are 3 times more connected people in this world than the human population. And that's absolutely alarming if you look at it. But with this, what has happened is it has given all the more chances for the criminals, for the people with mischievous thought process to go ahead and try and steal information, to try and act and disrupt services as we know it. Look at the way the Anthem health insurer that was hacked. In about 80 million of its customer base was affected. And this is just the news that we have as of 3rd of June 2016, when the Pakistani-based, it was basically a nation statewide attack on the government officials themselves by sending phishing emails which talked about the 7th Pay Commission. I'm sure people have heard about this in the back. But during this course of this discussion, there's been a lot of talk in terms of the banking environment, a lot of talk in terms of Bangladesh heist. But what people have not really on the top of things, if you look at it, there was a larger global play that was happening in this Bangladesh heist. And it was basically the hackers around the globe, and it was not just about a single nation, it was a group of nations that was responsible for this attack. And what has happened here is that in total, we believe, and that's a report from the Kaspersky lab itself, it says that $1 billion in transactions were already taken into account. Now, that has happened, and I'm putting this infographic again, and that has happened because of a malware. Now, a malware, if I break it up into parts, is a malicious software, or however way you might want to put it across. But if you look at this, the Carbonac attack was very peculiar. 300 IP addresses which were affected around the world. The map that you see in yellow, orange, and red are the countries that were affected. India was not spared. And the other one was the ones which are in the lighter shade blue. They are not affected as yet. Carbonac is still very, very active in today's world. But what came out of the Carbonac attack or the malware was that it used something of a remote access tool that system administrators normally use to basically remote manage the machines. I'm trying to put this up in a very simple manner, and the way it had affected was it spanned across technology. It was no longer the SWIFT network. It was affecting the Oracle databases. It was affecting the ATM machines. It was dispensing machines. The ATM machines were dispensing money at a scheduled time. Perpetrators were there, collected the money, and just walked off. Now, threats like this, actions like this will continue to happen, but people are also doing, the system administrators, network administrators are also doing their work in terms of protecting the network infrastructure. But what was really missing, what I think, and that has been the crux of this entire discussion this morning, is awareness, is the need to be aware of not only the threats that are pictured in the cyber world, but also to be aware in terms of the technology in use within your systems, of the processes that are being used within your systems, and of your own awareness of the cyber threats in and around. I'm going to quote something which I think is a pride for us as Indians, is the director of the DARPA project, where she was recently interviewed, and what she said was something which I think it's very common. It says, attacks are happening in microseconds, and this is something that Dr. Gulshan Rai was also mentioning, that it is so fast that it's just impossible to go ahead and capture them. So what she says is that all we can do is patch and pray and keep throwing the human beings at the problem. And that is where, no matter how much in terms of technology you might have, but technology is only limited to the knowledge of the person who's operating it. It can be as good as that. And when I look at this is the current network in a typical IT infrastructure. The traditional approach has always been a siloed concept of infrastructure protection.